Hello again, friends. Well, Rip Van Winkle has finally made it back to the town after getting blackout drunk while bowling with odd men. And home doesn't look like home. The town has grown. His house is a ruin. And the quiet inn is now less quiet. And worst of all, poor Rip has arrived during a debate about politics. All in all, I think he should go back to the mountain. But let's find out what happens next in Rip Van Winkle. Part 5. Alas, gentlemen, cried Rip, somewhat dismayed. I am a poor, quiet man, a native of the place, and a loyal subject of the king, God bless him. Here a general shout burst from the bystanders. A Tory! A Tory! A spy! A refugee! Hustle him! Away with him! Oh, for you non-history buffs, a Tory was used interchangeably with the term loyalist in the 13 colonies to refer to colonists who remained loyal to the crown during the conflict. It was with great difficulty that the self-important man in the cocked hat restored order, and, having assumed a tenfold austerity of brow, demanded again of the unknown culprit what he came there for, and whom he was seeking. The poor man humbly assured him that he meant no harm. He merely came there in search of some of his neighbors, who used to keep about the tavern. Well, who are they? Name them! Rip bethought himself a moment and inquired, Where's Nicholas Vedder? There was a silence for a little while, when an old man replied in a thin, piping voice, Nicholas Vedder? Why, he is dead, and gone these 18 years. There was a wooden tombstone in the churchyard that used to tell all about him, but that's rotten and gone, too. Oh, that's sad. Where's Brom Dutcher? Oh, he went off to the army in the beginning of the war. Some say he was killed at the storming of Stony Point. Others say he was drowned in a squall at the foot of Anthony's News. I don't know. He never came back again. Maybe he just found somewhere better and stayed there. Where's Van Bommel, the schoolmaster? He went off to the wars too, was a great militia general, and is now in Congress. Well, at least one of the stories has a good ending.
No, it's worse. He's in politics.
Ish. Rip's heart died away at hearing of these sad changes in his home and friends, and finding himself thus alone in the world. Every answer puzzled him too, by treating of such enormous lapses of time, and of matters which he could not understand. War? Congress? Stony Point? He had no courage to ask after any more friends, but cried out in despair, Does nobody here know Rip Van Winkle? Oh, Rip Van Winkle, exclaimed 2 or 3. Oh, to be sure, that's Rip Van Winkle yonder, leaning against the tree. Do you ever feel like you're not yourself? Maybe Rip is having an out-of-body experience. Rip looked and beheld a precise counterpart of himself as he went up the mountain, apparently as lazy and certainly as ragged. The poor fellow was now completely confounded. He doubted his own identity and whether he was himself or another man. In the midst of his bewilderment, the man in the cocked hat demanded who he was and what was his name. God knows, exclaimed he at his wit's end. I'm not myself. I'm somebody else. That's me, yonder. No, that's somebody else got into my shoes. I was myself last night, but I fell asleep on the mountain, and they've changed my gun, and everything's changed, and I'm changed, and I can't tell what's my name or who I am. I feel that very strongly. About this time, I'd be asking someone to make sure I'm awake. The bystanders began now to look at each other, nod and wink significantly, and tap their fingers against their foreheads. There was a whisper, also, about securing the gun and keeping the old fellow from doing mischief, at the very suggestion of which the self-important man with the cocked hat retired with some precipitation. At this critical moment, a fresh, comely woman pressed through the throng to get a peep at the gray-bearded man. She had a chubby child in her arms, which, frightened at his looks, began to cry. "Hush, Rip," cried she. "Hush, you little fool. The old man won't hurt you." The name of the child, the air of the mother, the tone of her voice, all awakened a train of recollections in his mind. "What is your name, my good woman?" "Judith Cardinere." "And what's your father's name?" "Ah, poor man, Rip Van Winkle was his name, but it's 20 years since he went away from home with his gun and never has been heard of since. His dog came home without him, but whether he shot himself or was carried away by the natives, nobody can tell. I was then but a little girl." Rip had but one more question to ask, and he put it with a faltering voice. Where's your mother?" Oh, she too had died, but a short time since. She broke a blood vessel in a fit of passion at a New England peddler. "Oh, how nice! She died doing what she loved," yelling at someone.
I can only imagine Rip's response. It's like, "Oh, my friends are dead now! My wife is dead. Yes!"
You know, I think that's kind of the point of the story. There was a drop of comfort, at least, in this intelligence. The honest man could contain himself no longer. He caught his daughter with her child in his arms. "I am your father," cried he. "Young Rip Van Winkle once, old Rip Van Winkle now. Does nobody know poor Rip Van Winkle?" All stood amazed, until an old woman, tottering out from among the crowd, put her hand to her brow and peered under it in his face for a moment, exclaimed, "Sure enough, it is Rip Van Winkle. It is himself. Welcome home again, old neighbor. Why, where have you been these 20 long years?" Rip's story was soon told, for the whole 20 years had been to him but as one night. The neighbors stared when they heard it. Some were seen to wink at each other and put their tongues in their cheeks, and the self-important man in the cocked hat, who, when the alarm was over, had returned to the field, screwed down the corners of his mouth and shook his head, upon which there was a general shaking of the head throughout the assemblage. It was determined, however, to take the opinion of old Peter Vanderdonk, who was seen slowly advancing up the road. He was a descendant of the historian of that name, who wrote one of the earliest accounts of the province. Peter was the most ancient inhabitant of the village, and well versed in all the wonderful events and traditions of the neighborhood. He recollected Rip at once, and corroborated his story in the most satisfactory manner. He assured the company that it was a fact, handed down from his ancestor, the historian, that the Catskill Mountains had always been haunted by strange beings. Yep, time to move. It was affirmed that the great Hendrik Hudson... Oh, so, cool story. And even more cool if you think about the party of bowlers. Hendrik Hudson, historically, is called Henry Hudson. He was searching for the Northwest Passage. Hudson became the first European to see Hudson Strait and the immense Hudson Bay in 1611. After wintering on the shore of James Bay, Hudson wanted to press on to the west, but most of his crew mutinied. The mutineers cast Hudson, his son, and 6 others adrift. What then happened to the Hudsons and their companions is unknown. Maybe just maybe, they now play ninepins in the Catskill Mountains. It was affirmed that the great Hendrik Hudson, the first discoverer of the river and country, kept a kind of vigil there every 20 years with his crew of the Half Moon, being permitted in this way to revisit the scenes of his enterprise, and keep a guardian eye upon the river and the great city called by his name. That his father had once seen them in their old Dutch dresses playing at ninepins in the hollow of the mountain, and that he himself had heard one summer afternoon the sound of their balls like distant peals of thunder. To make a long story short,
Too late!
the company broke up and returned to the more important concerns of the election. Rip's daughter took him home to live with her. She had a snug, well-furnished house, and a stout, cheery farmer for a husband, whom Rip recollected for one of the urchins that used to climb upon his back. As to Rip's son and heir, who was the ditto of himself, seen leaning against the tree, he was employed to work on the farm, but evinced a hereditary disposition to attend to anything else but his business. Rip now resumed his old walks and habits. He soon found many of his former cronies, though all rather the worse for the wear and tear of time, and preferred making friends among the rising generation, with whom he soon grew into great favor. I hope he got a new dog. Having nothing to do at home, and being arrived at that happy age when a man can be idle with impunity, he took his place once more on the bench at the inn door, and was referenced as one of the patriarchs of the village, and a chronicle of the old times before the war. It was some time before he could get into the regular track of gossip, or could be made to comprehend the strange events that had taken place during his torpor. How that there had been a revolutionary war, that the country had thrown off the yoke of old England, and that, instead of being a subject of His Majesty's George III, he was now a free citizen of the United States. Rip, in fact, was no politician. The changes of states and empires made but little impression on him. But there was one species of despotism under which he had long groaned, and that was petticoat government. Happily, that was at an end. He had got his neck out of the yoke of matrimony, and could go in and out whenever he pleased, without dreading the tyranny of Dame Van Winkle. Whenever her name was mentioned, however, he shook his head, shrugged his shoulders, and cast up his eyes, which might pass for either an expression of resignation to his fate, or joy at his deliverance. He used to tell his story to every stranger that arrived at Mr. Doolittle's hotel. He was observed at first to vary on some points every time he told it, which was doubtless owing to his having so recently awakened. It was at last settled down precisely to the tale I have related, and not a man, woman, or child of the neighborhood but knew it by heart. Some always pretended to doubt the reality of it, and insisted that Rip had been out of his head, and that there was one point on which he always remained flighty. The old Dutch inhabitants, however, almost universally gave it full credit. Even to this day, they never hear a thunderstorm of a summer afternoon about the Catskill, but they say Hendrik Hudson and his crew are at their game of ninepins. And it is a common wish of all henpecked husbands in the neighborhood, when life hangs heavy on their hands, that they might have a quieting draught out of Rip Van Winkle's flagon.
They broke the chalice from the palace.
They broke the chalice from the palace?
And replaced it with a flagon.
A flagon.
With a figure of a dragon.
Flagon with a dragon.
Right.
He gave up 20 years of his life, but he finally got the quiet life he wanted. I'm happy for him. I don't think I'd be willing to give up that much time, but it sounds nice, sitting in front of a village inn, telling stories and entertaining young and old alike. I want that life. Well, Now we come to the end of the video, where I beg you to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and rope in any unsuspecting fool that you can into watching my videos. I mean, share my videos with friends, neighbors, coworkers, small children, and even dogs. I would like to thank the wonderful Pixabay.com and their amazing contributors for making my videos good. Please consider joining my Patreon page, and don't worry if money is tight. The moral supporter level is free, and you can still be part of the polls and conversations. I also have Facebook and Instagram. You'll find links in the description below. But most of all, I would like to thank you, my friends, for being a part of this with me. It means more to me than I can say. And now, for a special thank you to my Patreon friend.
Ha 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 ha!